Welcome to EB5 Investment Voice, where attorney insights intersects with immigration investments. If you are a foreign investor, domestic fund manager, or enterprising entrepreneur and want to get the most out of the EB5 program, you have come to the right place. I'm Mark Deal, and I'll be your co-host on this journey. I'm joined by your host, Mona Shaw, and other attorneys at Mona Shaw & Associates, as well as immigration leaders from around the world. So let's get into EB5 Investment Voice. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of EB5 Investment Voice. We have a number of people here ready to speak to you today. And first, I'm going to hand off to Mona Shaw. Mona, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Mark. I hope you're good too.
I am doing fantastic. I realize you have Omar there as well.
I do. Anytime we have anything to do with securities and offerings and anything of that nature, Omar's a guy.
Thanks. Good. Omar always keeps us honest, right?
We're very lucky today also, Mark. We have Rupy Chima. Hi, Rupy.
Hi, Mona. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, Rupy. Thanks for joining us. If you could, give us a little bit of background on yourself.
I'm the co-founder of a firm called EB5 Diligence. We focus on providing due diligence reports for the benefit investors, people who are looking to invest in EB5 projects. We write a 30 to 40-page report which looks at the project from every aspect, from the business viability, immigration risk. So we review all the documents, we'll do a site visit, we'll meet with management, run background checks. So we're just vetting the deal to help the investors make a decision.
You see there, Mark, where we're heading.
I do.
In this episode, what we are planning to do is to acquaint our listeners, whether they be our investors or developers or even congressional folk, to a little bit about the due diligence which goes on into preparing documents for EB5. It's important for everybody to understand that we just don't pick up a document and just start writing and give it to an investor when they come in without any kind of due diligence. And also what is available to the public out there if anybody specifically wants to do their own due diligence and perhaps approach Rupy's firm separately. So, Mark, what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to very quickly go over what offering documents are and what's actually required in an EB5 case. And then after that, because Omar is a securities expert and he does a lot of the offering documents, we're going to discuss the red flags which might pop up in offering documents, what we should be looking for. That's where Rupy would really come into the to the equation, as well as what an ordinary investor should actually look for and what he should expect, or he or she should expect in an offering document. I would also like to touch on how much due diligence is expected of the author of documents, whether or not immigration attorneys or attorneys who are putting documents together are expected to carry out extensive due diligence. This is a question which is being raised quite frequently lately.
Okay. Sounds like a lot. So let's go ahead and dive into it. What are the offering documents that are required for an EB5 case?
One of the offering documents required is PPM, which is a private placement memorandum. And whenever I say that, a lot of times people's eyes glaze over. So when I'm teaching it, I have a slide of a turkey sandwich. And I kind of find that every time I show that slide, people suddenly, A, get what a PPM is, and B, are suddenly hungry.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm sure the person listening right now is like, that sounds delicious. So private placement memorandum.
All right. So Omar, I'll let you describe what do we need if we're filing an EB5 project and I'm a developer. What do I need to prepare for my investor?
Right. So the basic idea of a private placement memorandum is that an investor is entitled to know all material facts about a project they're investing in. And the private placement memorandum is a document that the projects use to disclose all material facts and have them all consolidated in one document. So
it's also called offering memorandum, right?
Yes. What will be in the private placement memorandum is information about all the information one would want to know about the project, and this can either be directly in the memorandum or it can be by reference to the business plan, and obviously it can be referencing other documents like the actual operating agreement of the company that the investors will subscribe to, subscription agreement, escrow agreement, all those things will be incorporated as an exhibit.
Omar, why would we need an offering document? If, say, I have a project and I only need one investor or two investors, do I still need to have a securities document?
Yes, the reason is that a investor is entitled to know everything, all material facts about a project. Not only does everything you say have to be true to them, you can't omit things that a reasonable person would want to know either. As I mentioned before, it will lay out all the basic information about the project and have exhibits of all the relevant agreements. But it will also have risk factors that one might not think of about the industry that the project is in, the location it's in. Obviously, in EB5, there's a lot of immigration risk as immigration law is changing regularly, and then also the outlook of what immigration law is going to look like in the future has been changing a lot in this past year or so. With we had short-term extension after short-term extension, and then there's different speculation about what's going to be in a final long-term bill. So those risk factors have been changing a lot over the past year as well.
So other than the PPM or offering memorandum, what other offering documents, me as a developer, what else do I need?
The PPM is the offering document, but it will reference and incorporate other documents such as the business plan, the escrow agreement. Normally, an investor's funds will go into escrow before they're actually released into the project. So normally there's an escrow agreement, the economic report, the operating agreement of the company that the investor's money will actually be going into, and
maybe a loan agreement, if it's relevant.
Yeah, when investors invest, usually it's a form of loan agreement because it hasn't been finalized yet until the money's actually raised.
So we've gone from private placement memorandum, and now we're talking about the business plan, the economic analysis, the escrow agreement, the operation agreement, the loan agreement. So obviously a lot more documents that goes with the EB5 as well as the private placement memorandum. So where do we start?
Well, I think it's important to note that it sounds a lot, Mark, and for anybody who's listening for the first time, they might be a little overwhelmed. But I think the most important document is perhaps the private placement memorandum, because that is supposed to encompass all of the documents.
Yes, the private placement memorandum ties everything together.
As Omar mentioned, these will be reference and more than likely exhibits within that PPM, correct?
That's right. Yes. Many times when you are looking at a project and you go and speak to a regional center or somebody who is promoting a project, they may just give you marketing material and they may not give you anything else. They are supposed to give you an offering document, some parts of the offering documents, and if they do, again, a lot of times they don't give you the PPM. They just may give you a business plan or a tailored business plan. So it's important to know that you need to see all of the documents. Anyway, Mark, we can talk about the offering documents more in detail as we go along, but that's a basic overview of the documents that are required. Now we're going to get into the meat of this podcast.
Which is why we have Rupy, right?
Right.
So Rupy, right now, how many projects do you think you work with?
On a monthly basis, on average, we're working on about 3 to 4 projects at a time.
Okay, that's a significant amount. Omar, when we're putting projects together, often the financials are an issue when we go back and forth with the developers. Financials, sometimes I should separate the financials relating to maybe a real estate project and then financials relating to a non-real estate project. Don't you find that's an issue?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have accurate pro formas and have a reasonable basis for the pro formas that they're including in their documentation, because this is what the investors are basing their analysis of the project's ability to repay their funds at the end of the process. It's all based on the pro formas.
Yeah, Rupy, do you find that financial areas are an area that you have to really delve deep in?
Yes, I mean, that's a big part of our analysis because we are vetting the pro formas and looking at what happens 5 to 7 years down the road. What do the exit ratios look like? If it's a real estate project, do the numbers support that they'll be able to refinance from a bank? Or, what do the resale values look like? Yes, that's a big part of our analysis. And when we are looking at financials, most of the real estate projects that we look at are large enough that they always have an outside market feasibility report done by a very credible source. So we get a lot of information in there. There's good comparables. That's very reliable. That's not an in-house prepared report. What we want to see is that it's not outdated. What happens in EB5 projects? Sometimes a project can be, in marketing for a long period of time, and these documents, especially the market feasibility, can become outdated. So when you're looking at something that's 2 years old, 3 years old, then we do have to go back and say, okay, have you, do you have any updated numbers?
Yeah, Rupy, it's just something which I find of interest. Back in 2011, our firm was out in China marketing with a project, it was a hotel project. And at that time, we were quoting an HVS report. And HVS is a very credible report, which stated that at that time, I'm talking 2011, the average cost for a 3-star hotel in Manhattan, the average cost of a hotel room was about $225. And that same report stated that by 2015, 2016, the average price would be in the 300s. Now, here we are in 2016, and the actual hotel prices have dropped. How would you foresee something like that?
We really rely on experts. As far as costs, what we're concerned with is, are the costs accurate depending on this year or the next year? If the project is going to be completed on time, do the project align with industry standards? Because most projects are going to be completed in 18 months to 2 years.
Well, you're referring again to a real estate project. I really do want to emphasize this because there are projects out there which are not real estate projects. I know the vast majority are, but there are some which are not. But real estate projects is what you're referring to right now.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah.
But it sounds like what I'm hearing from Rupy is that in the market feasibility and perhaps some of the other documents, some of the things she's looking for is their cost structure. And it sounds like perhaps maybe that's the first thing she looks for before, what the revenue structure may look like. Because as you said, Mona, market conditions may change and may affect price, but there could also be things that affect costs. So Rupy, is that what you look for first is, what's the bottom line credibility?
Right. I mean, you want to make sure that the project budget is reasonable. And if they have any kind of construction contract that already executed or maximum price contract, that helps because that locks in the cost. So you want to know how realistic the project costs are. Because if there are overruns and then they have to go back out and raise more money, obviously that's a red flag.
Right. So the outfit, if we don't have construction contracts, basis do we use to analyze the cost?
You're looking for third-party corroboration. You can look on, there are a lot of reports available, such as RS means, where you can plug in information based on square footage, what are the costs, what are the industry average costs. So there are outside resources, reports that we will use to see what is an average industry cost and if the project is in line with that.
Rupy, what often bothers me, I know you're very, very good when it comes to real estate projects, but what about non-real estate projects? What do you do to look at the industry standards for the financing in that? And I'm referring to, say, projects such as, say, forestry and timber projects, or maybe transportation projects, or other manufacturing type projects.
We haven't done a lot of forestry or timber projects. If we were to come across a project or an industry that we have not worked with, I would definitely have to source another expert if we don't understand that industry, because we can't be an expert in every industry. So really depending on the project, we might have to hire somebody else to work with us. I mean, we recently looked at a car plant manufacturer. And, this was an ongoing manufacturing business. They had audited financials. So we could look at the historicals and see what was going on. And this was an expansion business. So that was pretty easy to vet. And there's so much information available on the auto industry, publicly as to what's going on. So there are some industries, there's just a lot of public information available that you can verify.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, sometimes we may just have to ask someone for help.
Right. And Mark, you may remember we discussed the importance of accurate financials when we were speaking with Jeff Carr, because inaccurate financials can totally screw up the job count.
Right. Exactly. And that could go into all sorts of different denial issues and everything, as we've uncovered. Okay. So we've talked about the financials and some risks associated with those, and specifically what Rupy looks for. Are there any other risks or red flags that we should look out for?
Well, I was going to ask Rupy, Mark, I can see all the stuff that you do look at with financials, but what is a red flag for you with relation to financials?
Really, it's the reliability of information. If the assumptions are not backed they don't seem reasonable, that would be a red flag. I mean, if we feel that, their expenses may be underestimated, that would be a red flag, or they're being too aggressive on the revenue side, that would be a red flag. I was looking at a real estate project recently, and we felt like the sales they were projecting for the condos compared to what was going on in the market and the product they were selling that were aggressive. So that would be one example of a red flag.
Rupy, what other areas do you find red flags in besides financials?
Red flags a lot in economic studies. They can be minor or they can be major. Inconsistencies are very common between the budget that's in the market feasibility report or the budget that's in the business plan or the budget that the economist is using. Sometimes when budgets, this is a working process and budgets can shift and they sometimes don't tend to be carried out throughout all the documents. And so the economist may have used an outdated budget and those are just minor issues that can be fixed, but they can cause a request for evidence from USCIS and, which can delay the processing times. They may be minor issues, so we do point out the inconsistencies. And also if they're using some inputs in the economic analysis that we think has been questioned by USCIS. Now, on vetting the economic analysis, by the way, we do work with an economist who's an expert in EB5 who does the due diligence on the economic study because my analysts and I are not economists, so we're not. So we work with an economist who looks at those reports.
That's very interesting that you mentioned the inconsistencies being a red flag. Is it an issue for you as to who is the author of the documents? I mean, how much due diligence and how much do you expect to see in the documents? Obviously, some inconsistencies are not anyone's fault, but is that something you look out for?
As to who's preparing the economic report or the business plan?
That's correct, yes. Or the documents generally.
Yes, we have seen enough that we see the common trends and we see how certain parties write those documents. So we know what to expect sometimes. As far as red flags, I mean, our job is to look at the PPM because that's the legal binding document where the issuer is making the disclosures to the investors saying, this is what I'm vouching, like this is the story of the project. So our job is to fact check everything that's in the PPM. So if we find, for example, we'll do a lot of online searches. And if we find that there's some sort of litigation going on that has not been disclosed in the PPM, that's obviously a red flag, or some sort of a past bankruptcy that we think should be in the PPM, that's a red flag.
That's interesting. You mentioned that there is a project which luckily, a lot of the jobs were created and people did get their green cards, but the actual project itself went bankrupt. I'm not sure if you know about this one, Rupy, the South Dakota meat marketing plant. Our firm was working on the 829s on that firm, and as I said, luckily, even though the project's bankrupt, people did get their green cards. But what had happened here was that there wasn't anything wrong with the project itself, but what had happened was that the project did not disclose that they had unreasonable debt. They had an awful lot of debt, which even though the EB5 money came in, and even though there was a profit made and the plant put up, the debt basically brought the whole project down.
Right.
So in a project like that, where they're just not disclosing something like hidden debt, how would you guys find that?
It's a very holistic approach, right? We would just look at the principles, what other businesses they have been involved with, understand the whole story, and if there are other projects going on, we do ask for financials. We will ask for, their balance sheets to see what kind of debt. Now, if it's not an audited balance sheet, that can be difficult to rely on. But, we just look at the entire background of who this person is and what other businesses they're involved in. There were a lot of red flags, I think, with that project. I believe the principal had a lot of issues with their credit history as well.
That's right, yes.
So if you just did a simple credit check and, you realize that there was a lot of flags on that credit, you would realize they're obviously having cash flow issues. So those are, that's how you could discover just through a simple credit check or a background check. There's two.
Yeah, Rupy, the one point, though, I do make out often when I'm just talking to investors and when I'm teaching and even to developers is that having a fraudulent project and having a bad project are two different things. A fraudulent project is somebody who has criminal intent from the very outset. And there are a lot of flags which come up when something is fraud. A bad project is when somebody has every intent for a business to go forward, a project to go forward, to pay back the investors, but for one reason or the other, it's just a bad business deal. And I think that it's very important to let the listeners understand this also, that we have a lot of EB5 projects on the market. The amount of fraudulent projects in comparison to the amount of projects which are out on the market are very few. Would you agree?
I agree completely because, we have not come across a project where someone's trying to commit fraud. But we see projects, they vary. Some have a lot more strengths. So our objective is to really lay out the strengths and the weaknesses of each project and see, which projects the investor prefers and which weaknesses they can live with, because these are at-risk investments and every project is going to have a weakness, and it's really up to the investor to decide, okay, I like this part of the project, maybe I can live with this. For example, some people want to only invest in projects where the loan is being made to the project and they have that EB5 loan has a first security interest. Some big projects may be very sexy projects in big cities, but, the EB5 loan is a junior loan. So that's what we're trying to point out, basically. Compare projects and the strengths of each project and the weakness and see what appeals to the investor.
Most of the time, though, we find that the investor relies very, very heavily on recommendations because they get to the point where they're overwhelmed or confused. Although they may be very sophisticated business people or sophisticated in their own rights, perhaps professionals, a lot of the projects rely on local nuances, maybe the actual location of, say, a restaurant or the hotel, or maybe there is some other nuance involved. Are you asked at the end of the day, Rupy, are you asked for recommendations and do you give them?
No, we as a due diligence firm do not give recommendations. We provide reports which are written similarly. So one project is very easy to compare to the next project with our reports. So we will just say, you have to do the comparing. You have to decide for yourself as to what is it that you like about the project and what you don't like about the project. Because it's very difficult to, just say a thumbs up, or give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, because there's so much to consider in a project.
Yeah, I agree. Omo, where do you find you have difficulty in getting information or the information that you really want for a PPM from a developer?
I wouldn't say there's a specific area. I would just say normally there's a pressure to get projects to market as soon as possible, but then a lot of information doesn't really come until over time, like getting a senior loan in place, like I mentioned earlier. And there's like a conflict between trying to get to market as soon as possible and getting all the information that you need and that an investor would want to know fully in place and finalized. Because for example, lots of times someone will want to go to market, but they don't know who the general contractor is going to be. So we have to kind of slow down the process and say, we need to, that's a very important fact. We need to get that in place before we go to market.
So it sounds like a bad project isn't a fraudulent project. And for the most part, there's not a lot of fraudulent projects. But as Rupy indicated, there is a wide spectrum there, from great projects to not so great projects. It sounds like the role of her firm isn't such to make recommendations. You should invest in this. You should invest in that. But it's really to provide the strengths and the weaknesses for the investor, so the investor can then make the decision of what works best for them. Mona, Omar, Rupy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for being with us today on EB5 Investment Voice. The topics presented in this podcast is informational in nature and is not to be taken as specific legal advice. If you have questions on the topics presented in this episode or other investment immigration needs, please contact Mona Shaw and Associates. Mona and her attorney staff can be reached at mshawlaw.com. That's mshawlaw.com, or call the office at 212-233-7473. Don't worry about trying to write all this down, as it's already embedded in your podcast player of choice. The contact information and other valuable resources can be found there. We touched upon the various offering documents, including the private placement memorandum, and I'm sure you're hungry now with the turkey sandwich analogy that Mona offered, and Omar told us a few things of what to expect in those documents and how they should all tie together. Speaking of tying together, I'm glad that we had Rupy Chima on from EB5 Diligence, where she talked about a lot of the red flags that they see in documents. That includes reputable reports from outside vendors, industry experts in the areas that they're reporting on, as well as financial documents and how they should tie out, because there are multiple documents and sometimes it takes a while for these projects to develop. So you may have a business plan that reflects one set of financials and an economic analysis that reflects another one. And speaking of economic analysis, on the next episode, we're going to have Jeff Carr on to talk about targeted employment areas. Make sure you don't miss it by subscribing to the podcast. While you're at it, leave us a rating on iTunes. If you really found this episode valuable, share it with someone else that could benefit from this information. Until then, I'll see you on the next episode of EB5 Investment Voice.